Hello, Speedy readers. My goodness me, it's shamefully been 3 years since I last posted an episode for Phillip Pullman's Northern Lights. Things have been bonkers, but I've been inspired by messages from people saying, "Where's the rest of the content?" Because fair enough, you get shortchanged. And also by the new adaptation of His Dark Materials by BBC. And so I thought it's high time to pick this up and crack on with the story. And also, just to make it easier, of just making the episodes longer so that we can just get further into the book. So we're going to see how it goes for 60 minutes of reading so that we can really get into the world of Phillip Pullman. So I'm going to set the timer for an hour, and let's pick up where we left off, which is Mrs. Coulter just tucked Lyra into bed. So 3 years later, here we go. Okay. When Mrs. Coulter had wished her a soft good night and gone out, Pantalaimon plucked at her hair. She brushed him away, but, he whispered, "Where's the thing?" She knew at once what he meant. Her old shabby overcoat hung in the wardrobe. A few seconds later, she was back in bed, sitting up cross-legged in the lamplight, with Pantalaimon watching closely as she unfolded the black velvet and looked at what it was the master had given her. "What did he call it?" she whispered. "An alethiometer." There was no point in asking what that meant. It lay heavily in her hands, the crystal face gleaming, the brass body exquisitely machined. It was very like a clock, or a compass, for there were hands pointing to places around the dial. But instead of the hours or the points of the compass, there were several little pictures, each of them painted with extraordinary precision, as if on ivory with the finest and slenderest sable brush. She turned the dial around to look at them all. There was an anchor, an hourglass, surmounted by a skull, a bull, a beehive, 36 altogether, and she couldn't even guess what they meant. "There's a wheel, look," said Pantalaimon. "See if you can wind it up." There were 3 little knurled winding wheels, in fact, and each of them turned one of the 3 shorter hands, which moved around the dial in a series of smooth, satisfying clicks. You could arrange them to a point at any of the pictures. And once they had clicked into position, pointing exactly at the centre of each one, they would not move. The 4th hand was longer and more slender, and seemed to be made of a duller metal than the other 3. Lyra couldn't control its movement at all. It swung where it wanted to, like a compass needle, except that it didn't settle. "Meter means measure," said Pantalaimon. "Like thermometer. The chaplain told us that." "Yes, but that's a bit easy." "Oh, no, sorry. Yes, but that's the easy bit," she whispered back. "What do you think it's for?" Neither of them could guess. Lyra spent a long time turning the hands to point at one symbol or another. Angel, helmet, dolphin, globe, lute, compasses, candle, thunderbolt, horse, and watching the long needle swing on its never-ceasing errant way. And although she understood nothing, she was intrigued and delighted by the complexity and the detail. Pantalaimon became a mouse to get closer to it, and rested his tiny paws on the edge, his button eyes bright black with curiosity as he watched the needle swing. "What do you think the master meant about Uncle Asriel?" she said. "Perhaps we've got to keep it safe and give it to him." "But the master was going to poison him. Perhaps it's the opposite. Perhaps he was going to say, 'Don't give it to him.'" "No," Pantalaimon said. "It was her we had to keep it safe from." There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Coulter said, "Lyra, I should put the light out now if I were you. You're tired, and we'll be busy tomorrow." Lyra had thrust the alethiometer swiftly under the blankets. "All right, Mrs. Coulter," she said. "Good night now." "Good night." She snuggled down and switched off the light. Before she fell asleep, she tucked the alethiometer under the pillow, just in case. Then we have Chapter 5, The Cocktail Party. And as with all Speedy reads, I will make mistakes, I'll get words wrong, intonation will be wrong sometimes, but I'll do my very best. So the cocktail party. In the days that followed, Lyra went everywhere with Mrs. Coulter, almost as if she were her demon herself. Mrs. Coulter knew a great many people, and they met in all kinds of different places. In the morning there might be a meeting of geographers at the Royal Arctic Institute, and Lyra would sit by and listen. And then Mrs. Coulter might meet a politician or a cleric for lunch in a smart restaurant, and they would be very taken with Lyra and order special dishes for her, and she would learn how to eat asparagus or what sweetbreads tasted like. And then in the afternoon there might be more shopping, for Mrs. Coulter was preparing her expedition, and there were furs and oilskins and waterproof boots to buy, as well as sleeping bags and knives and drawing instruments that delighted Lyra's heart. After that, they might go to tea and meet some ladies, as well dressed as Mrs. Coulter, if not so beautiful, or accomplished. Women so unlike female scholars or gypton boat mothers or college servants as almost to be a new sex altogether, one with dangerous powers and qualities such as elegance, charm, and grace. Lyra would be dressed up prettily for these occasions, and the ladies would pamper her and include her in their graceful, delicate talk, which was all about people. This artist or that politician or those lovers. When the evening came, Mrs. Coulter might take Lyra to the theatre, and again there would be lots of glamorous people to talk to and be admired by, for it seemed that Mrs. Coulter knew everyone important in London. In the intervals between all these other activities, Mrs. Coulter would teach her the rudiments of geography and mathematics. Lyra's knowledge had great gaps in it, like a map of the world, largely eaten by mice, for at Jordan they had taught her in a piecemeal and disconnected way. A junior scholar would be detailed to catch her and instruct her in such, and the lessons would continue for a sullen week or so until she forgot to turn up, to the scholar's relief. Or else a scholar would forget what he was supposed to teach her and drill her at great length about the subject of his current research, whatever that happened to be. It was no wonder her knowledge was patchy. She knew about atoms and elementary particles and baromagnetic charges and the four fundamental forces and other bits and pieces of experimental theology, but nothing about the solar system. In fact, when Mrs. Coulter realised this and explained how the Earth and the other 5 planets revolved around the Sun, Lyra laughed loudly at the joke. However, she was keen to show that she did know some things, and when Mrs. Coulter was telling her about electrons, she said, expertly, yes, they're negatively charged particles, sort of like dust, except that dust isn't charged. As soon as she said that, Mrs. Coulter Demon snapped his head up to look at her, and all the golden fur on his little body stood up bristling as if it were charged itself. Mrs. Coulter laid a hand on his back. Dust, she said. Yeah, you know, from space, that dust. What do you know about dust, Lyra? That it comes out of space, and it lights people up, if you have a special sort of camera to see it by. Except not children. It doesn't affect children. Where did you learn that from? By now, Lyra was aware that there was a powerful tension in the room because Pantalaimon had crept ermine-like onto her lap and was trembling violently. Just someone at Jordan, Lyra said vaguely. I forget who. I think it was one of the scholars. Was it in one of your lessons? Yeah, it might have been. Or else it might have been just in passing. Yes, I think that was it. This scholar, I think he was from New Denmark. He was talking to the chaplain about dust and I was just passing and it sounded interesting, so I couldn't help stop to listen. That's what it was. I see, said Mrs. Coulter. Is it right, what he told me? Or did I get it wrong? Well, I don't know. I'm sure you know much more than I do. Let's get back to those electrons. Later, Pantalaimon said, You know when all the fur stood up on her demon? Well, I was behind him, and she grabbed his fur so tight her knuckles went white. You couldn't see. It was a long time till his fur went down. I thought he was going to leap at you. That was strange, no doubt, but neither of them knew what to make of it. And finally, there were other kinds of lessons so gently and subtly given that they didn't feel like lessons at all. how to wash one's own hair, how to judge which colours suited one, how to say no in such a charming way that no offence was given, how to put on lipstick, powder, scent. To be sure, Mrs. Coulter didn't teach Lyra the latter arts directly, but she knew Lyra was watching when she made herself up, and she took care to let Lyra see where she kept her cosmetics, and to allow her time on her own to explore and try them out for herself. Time passed, and autumn began to change into winter. From time to time, Lyra thought of Jordan College, but it seemed small and quiet compared to the busy life she led now. Every so often, she thought of Roger too, and felt uneasy. But there was an opera to go to, or a new dress to wear, or the Royal Arctic Institute to visit, and then she forgot him again. When Lyra had been living there for 6 weeks or so, Mrs. Coulter decided to hold a cocktail party. Lyra had the impression that there was something to celebrate, though Mrs. Coulter never said what it was. She ordered flowers, she discussed canapes and drinks with the caterer. She spent a whole evening with Lyra deciding whom to invite. We must have the Archbishop. I couldn't afford to leave him out, though he's the most hateful old snob. Lord Boreal is in town. He'll be fun. And the Princess Postnikova. Do you think it would be right to invite Eric Anderson? I wonder if it's about time to take him up. Eric Anderson was the latest fashionable dancer. Lyra had no idea what take him up meant, but she enjoyed giving her opinion nonetheless. She dutifully wrote down all the names Mrs. Coulter suggested, spelling them atrociously, then crossing them out when Mrs. Coulter decided against them after all. When Lyra went to bed, Pantalaimon whispered from the pillow. "She's never going to the north. She's going to keep us here forever. When are we going to run away?" "She is," Lyra whispered back. "You just don't like her." "Well, that's hard luck. I like her. And why would she be teaching us navigation and all if she wasn't going to take us north?" "To stop you getting impatient, that's why. You don't really want to stand around at the cocktail party being all sweet and pretty. She's just making a pet out of you." Lyra turned her back and closed her eyes. But what Pantalaimon said was true. She had been feeling confined and cramped by this polite life, however luxurious it was. She would have given anything for a day with her Oxford ragamuffin friends, with a battle in the clay beds and a race along the canal. The one thing that kept her polite and attentive to Mrs. Coulter was that tantalising hope of going north. Perhaps they would meet Lord Asriel. Perhaps he and Mrs. Coulter would fall in love, and they would get married and adopt Lyra and go rescue Roger from the gobblers. On the afternoon of the cocktail party, Mrs. Coulter took Lyra to a fashionable hairdresser's where her stiff, dark blonde hair was softened and waved, and her nails were filed and polished, and where they even applied a little makeup to her eyes and lips to show her how to do it. Then they went to collect the new dress Mrs. Coulter had ordered for her, and to buy some patent leather shoes, and then it was time to go back to the flat and check the flowers and get dressed. "Not the shoulder bag, dear," said Mrs. Coulter as Lyra came out of her bedroom, glowing with a sense of her own prettiness. Lyra had taken to wearing a little white leather shoulder bag everywhere, so as to keep the alethiometer close at hand. Mrs. Coulter, loosening the cramped way some roses had been bunched into a vase, saw that Lyra wasn't moving and glanced pointedly at the door. "Oh, please, Mrs. Coulter, I do love this bag." "Not indoors, Lyra. It looks absurd to be carrying a shoulder bag in your own home. Take it off at once and come and help me check the glasses." It wasn't so much her snappish tone as the words, "in your own home," that made Lyra resist stubbornly. Pantalaimon flew to the floor and instantly became a polecat, arching his back against her white ankle socks. Encouraged by this, Lyra said, "But it won't be in the way. And it's the only thing I really like wearing. I think it really suits—" She didn't finish the sentence because Mrs. Coulter's demon sprang off the sofa in a blur of golden fur and pinned Pantalaimon to the carpet before he could move. Lyra cried out in alarm and then in fear and pain as Pantalaimon twisted this way and that, shrieking and snarling, unable to loosen the golden monkey's grip. Only a few seconds, and the monkey had overmastered him. With one fierce black paw around his throat and his back paws gripping the polecat's lower limbs, he took one of Pantalaimmon's ears in his other paw and pulled, as if he intended to tear it off. Not angrily either, but with a cold, curious force that was horrifying to see, and even worse to feel. Lyra sobbed in terror. "Don't! Please! Stop hurting us!" Mrs. Coulter looked up from her flowers. "Do as I tell you, then," she said. "I promise." The golden monkey stepped away from Pantalaimon as if he were suddenly bored. Pantalaimon fled to Lyra at once. Excuse me. The golden monkey stepped away from Pantalaimon as if he was suddenly bored. Pantalaimon fled to Lyra at once, and she scooped him up to her face to kiss and gentle. "Now, Lyra," said Mrs. Coulter. Lyra turned her back abruptly and slammed into her bedroom, but no sooner had she banged the door shut behind her than it opened again. Mrs. Coulter was standing there, only a foot or two away. "Lyra, if you behave in this coarse and vulgar way, we shall have a confrontation, which I will win. Never. Take off that bag this instant. Control that unpleasant frown. Never slam a door again in my hearing or out of it. Now the first guests will be arriving in a few minutes, and they are going to find you perfectly behaved, sweet, charming, innocent, attentive, delightful in every way. I particularly wish for that, Lyra. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mrs. Coulter." "Then kiss me." She bent a little and offered her cheek. Lyra had to stand on tiptoe to kiss it. She noticed how smooth it was, and the slight perplexing smell of Mrs. Coulter's flesh, scented but somehow metallic. She drew away and laid the shoulder bag on her dressing table before following Mrs. Coulter back to the drawing room. "What do you think of the flowers, my dear?" said Mrs. Coulter, as sweetly as if nothing had happened. "I suppose one can't go wrong with roses, but you can have too much of a good thing. Have the caterers bought enough ice? Oh, be a dear and go and ask. Warm drinks are horrid." Lyra found it was quite easy to pretend to be light-hearted and charming, though she was conscious every second of Pantaleimon's disgust and of his hatred for the golden monkey. Presently the doorbell rang, and soon the room was filling up with fashionably dressed ladies, or handsome or distinguished men. Lyra moved among them, offering canapes or smiling sweetly and making pretty answers when they spoke to her. She felt like a universal pet, and the second she voiced that thought to herself, Pantalaimon stretched his goldfinch wings and chirruped loudly. She sensed his glee at having proved her right, and became a little more retiring. "And where do you go to school, my dear?" said an elderly lady, inspecting Lyra through a lorgnette. I don't know, what's that, a monocle? Maybe. "Oh, I don't go to school," Lyra told her. "Really? Well, I thought your mother would have sent you to her old school. A very good place." Lyra was mystified until she realized the old lady's mistake. "Oh, she's not my mother. I'm just here helping her. I'm her personal assistant," she said importantly. "I see. And who are your people?" Again Lyra had to wonder what she meant before replying. "They were a count and countess," she said. "They both died in an aeronautical accident in the north." "Oh, which count?" "Count Belacqua. He was Lord Asriel's brother." The old lady's demon, a scarlet macaw, shifted as if in irritation from one foot to another. The old lady was beginning to frown with curiosity, so Lyra smiled sweetly and moved on. She was going past a group of men and one young woman near the large sofa when she heard the word dust. She had seen enough of society now to understand when men and women were flirting, and she watched the process with fascination, though she was more fascinated by the mention of dust, and she hung back to listen. The men seemed to be scholars, from the way the young women were questioning them. The men seemed to be scholars from the way the young woman was questioning them. Lyra took her to be a student of some kind. "It was discovered by a Muscovite. Stop me if you know this already," a middle-aged man was saying, as the young woman gazed at him in admiration. A man called Rusakov, and they're usually called Rusakov particles after him. Elementary particles that don't interact in any other way with others. Very hard to detect, but the extraordinary thing is that they seem to be attracted to human beings. Really? Said the young woman, wide-eyed. And even more extraordinary, he went on, some humans, well, more than others, adults attract them, but not children. At least not much, and not until adolescence. In fact, that's the very reason. His voice dropped, and he moved closer to the young woman, putting his hand confidentially on her shoulder. That's the very reason the ablation board was set up, as a good hostess here could tell you. Really? Is she involved with the ablation board? My dear, she is the ablation board. It's entirely her own project. The man was about to tell her more when he caught sight of Lyra. She stared back at him, unblinking. And perhaps he had, well, a little too much to drink, or perhaps he was keen to impress the young woman, for he said, "Oh, this little lady knows all about it, I'll be bound. You're safe from the ablation board, aren't you, my dear?" "Oh, yes," said Lyra. "I'm safe from everyone here. Where I used to live in Oxford, there were all kinds of dangerous things. There were Egyptians. They take kids and sell them to the Turks for slaves. And on Port Meadow, at the full moon, there's a werewolf that comes from the old nunnery at Godstow. I heard him howling once. And there's the gobblers." "Well, that's what I mean," the man said. "That's what they call the ablation board, don't they?" Lyra felt Pantalaimon tremble suddenly, but he was on his best behaviour. The two demons of the two grown-ups, a cat and a butterfly, didn't seem to notice. "Gobblers," said the young woman. "What a peculiar name. Why do they call them gobblers?" Lyra was about to tell her one of the blood-curdling stories she'd made up to frighten the Oxford kids with, but the man was already speaking. "From the initials, do you see? General Ablation Board. Very old idea, as a matter of fact. In the Middle Ages, parents would give their children to the church to be monks or nuns, and the unfortunate brats were known as oblates, means of sacrifice, an offering, something of that sort. So the same idea was taken up when they were looking into the dust business, as our little friend probably knows. Why don't you go and talk to Lord Boreal?" he added to Lyra directly. "I'm sure he'd like to meet Mrs. Coulter's protégé. That's him, the man with the grey hair and the serpent demon." He wanted to get rid of Lyra so that he could talk more privately with the young woman. Lyra could tell that easily. But the young woman, it seemed, was still interested in Lyra, and slipped away from the man to talk to her. "Stop a minute. What's your name?" "Lyra." "I'm Adele Starminster. I'm a journalist. Could I have a quiet word?" Thinking it only natural that people should wish to talk to her, Lyra simply said, "Yes." The woman's butterfly demon rose into the air, casting about to left and right, and fluttered down to whisper something, at which Adele Starminster said, "Come to the window seat." This was a favourite spot of Lyra's. It looked onto the river, and at this time of night the lights across on the south bank were glittering brilliantly over their reflections in the black water of the high tide. "Doorbell. Hold it right there. Hold it right there. I'll pause this. Pause. Right. Door answered. Stuff dealt with. Resume. Okay. There we go. Okay, so this was a favourite spot of Lyra's. It overlooked the river, and at this time of night the lights across on the south bank were glittering brightly over their reflections in the black water of high tide. A line of barges hauled by a tug moved upriver. Adele Starminster sat down and moved along the cushioned seat to make room. "Did Professor Docker say that you had some connection with Mrs. Coulter?" "Yes." "What is it? You're not a daughter or something?" "I suppose I should know." "No," said Lyra, "of course not. I'm her personal assistant." "Her personal assistant? Well, you're a bit young, aren't you? I thought you were related to her or something. What's she like?" "She's very clever," said Lyra. Before this evening she would have said much more, but things were changing. "Yes, but personally, Adele Starminster insisted. I mean, is she friendly, or impatient, or what? Do you live here with her? What's she like in private? She's very nice, said Lyra stolidly. And what sort of things do you do? How do you help her? Well, I do calculations and all that, like for navigation. Ah, I see. And where do you come from? What's your name again? Lyra. I come from Oxford. Why did Mrs. Coulter pick you to... She stopped very suddenly, because Mrs. Coulter herself had appeared close by. From the way Adele Starminster looked up at her, and the agitated way her demon was fluttering around her head, Lyra could tell that the young woman wasn't supposed to be at the party at all. I don't know your name, said Mrs. Coulter very quietly. But I shall find it out within 5 minutes, and then you will never work as a journalist again. Now, get up very quietly without making a fuss and leave. I might add that whoever brought you here will also suffer. Mrs. Coulter seemed to be charged with some kind of anbaric force. She even smelled different. A hot smell, like heated metal, came off her body. Lyra had felt something of it earlier, but she was seeing it directed at someone else, and poor Adele Starminster had no force to resist. Her demon fell limp on her shoulder and flapped its gorgeous wings once or twice before fainting, and the woman herself seemed to be unable to stand fully upright. Moving in a slight awkward crouch, she made her way through the press of loudly talking guests and out of the drawing-room window. She had one hand clutched to her shoulder, holding the swooning demon in place. Well, said Mrs. Coulter to Lyra. Well, I never told her anything important, Lyra said. What was she asking? Just about what I was doing and who I was and stuff like that. As she said that, Lyra noticed that Mrs. Coulter was alone, without her demon. But how could that be? But a moment later, the golden monkey appeared at her side, and reaching down, she took his hand and swung him lightly to her shoulder. At once, she seemed at ease again. If you come across anyone else who obviously hasn't been invited, dear, do come and find me, won't you? The hot metallic smell was vanishing. Perhaps Lyra had only imagined it. She could smell Mrs. Coulter's scent again, and the roses, and the cigarillo smoke, and the scent of other women. Mrs. Coulter smiled at Lyra in a way that seemed to say, You and I understand things, don't we? And moved on to greet some other guests. Pantalaimon was whispering in Lyra's ear. While she was here, her demon was coming out of our bedroom. He's been spying. He knows about the alethiometer. Lyra felt that was probably true, but there was nothing she could do about it. What had that professor been saying about the gobblers? She looked around to find him again, but no sooner had she seen him than the commissionaire, in servant's dress for the evening, and another man tapped the professor on the shoulder and spoke quietly to him, at which he turned pale and followed them out. That took no more than a couple of seconds, and it was so discreetly done that hardly anyone noticed, but it left Lyra feeling anxious and exposed. She wandered through the 2 big rooms where the party was taking place, half listening to the conversations around her, half interested in the taste of the cocktails she wasn't allowed to try, and increasingly fretful. She wasn't aware that anyone was watching her until the commissionaire appeared at her side and bent to say, Miss Lyra, the gentleman by the fireplace would like to speak to you. He's Lord Boreal, if you didn't know. Lyra looked up across the room. The powerful-looking grey-haired man was looking directly at her, and as their eyes met, he nodded and beckoned. Unwilling, but more interested now, she went across. Good evening, child, he said. His voice was smooth and commanding. His serpent's mailed head and emerald eyes glittered in the light from the cut-glass lamp on the wall nearby. Good evening, said Lyra. How is my old friend, the Master of Jordan? Well, very well, thank you. I expect they were all sorry to say goodbye to you. Yes, they were. And is Mrs. Coulter keeping you busy? What is she teaching you? Because Lyra was feeling rebellious and uneasy, she didn't answer this patronizing question with the truth, or with one of her usual flights of fancy. Instead, she said, I'm learning about the Rusakov particles and about the ablation board. He seemed to become focused at once. In the same way, but you could focus the beam of an ambarrack lantern. All of his attention streamed at her fiercely. "Suppose you tell me what you know," he said. "They're doing experiments in the north," Lyra said. She was feeling reckless now. "Like Dr. Grumman. Oh, go on." "They've got this special kind of photogram where you can see dust, and when you see a man, there's like all light coming to him, and there's none on a child. At least, well, not so much." "Did Mrs. Coulter show you a picture like that?" Lyra hesitated, for this was not lying but something else, and she wasn't practised at it. "No," she said after a moment. "I saw that one at Jordan College." "And who showed it to you?" "Well, he wasn't really showing it to me," Lyra admitted. "I was just passing when I saw it, and then my friend Roger was taken by the ablation board, but—" "And who showed you that picture?" "My Uncle Asriel." "When?" "When he was in Jordan College last time." "I see. And what else have you been learning about? Did I hear you mention the ablation board?" "Yes, but I didn't hear about that from him. I heard it here." Which was exactly true, she thought. He was looking at her narrowly. Why can't I say that? He was looking at her narrowly. She gazed back with all the innocence she had. Finally, he nodded. "Then Mrs. Coulter must have decided you were ready to help her in her work. Interesting. Have you taken part yet?" "No," said Lyra. What was he talking about? Pantalaimon was cleverly in his most inexpressive shape, a moth, and couldn't betray her feelings, and she was sure she could keep her own face innocent. "And has she told you what happens to the children?" "No, she hasn't told me that. I only just know that it's about dust and they're like a kind of sacrifice." Again, that wasn't a lie, exactly, she thought. She had never said that Mrs. Coulter herself had told her. "Sacrifice is rather a dramatic way of putting it. What's done is for their own good as well as ours. And, of course, they all come to Mrs. Coulter willingly. That's why she's so valuable. They must want to take part. And what child could resist her? And if she's going to use you as well to bring them in, so much the better. I'm very pleased." He smiled at her in the way Mrs. Coulter had, as if they were both in on a secret. She smiled politely back, and he turned away to talk to someone else. She and Pantalaimon could sense each other's horror. She wanted to go away by herself and talk to him. She wanted to leave the flat. She wanted to go back to Jordan College and her little shabby bedroom on staircase 12. She wanted to find Lord Asriel. And as if in answer to that last wish, she heard his name mentioned, and wandered closely to the group talking nearby with the pretext of helping herself to a canapé from the plate on the table. A man in a bishop's purple was saying, "No, I don't think Lord Asriel will be troubling us for quite some time." "And where did you say he was being held?" "In the fortress of Svalbard, I'm told. Guarded by Panzerborn. Oh no, this is one of those words. Panzerbjorn. I'll have to find out. Panzerborn. You know, armoured bears. That's a better way of saying it, isn't it? Armoured bears. Formidable creatures. He won't escape them if he lives to be 1,000. The fact is that I really think, well, the way is clear. Very nearly clear. The last experiments have been confirmed what I always believed. The last experiments have confirmed what I always believed. The dust is an emanation. Oh, it has been 3 years, isn't it? The last experiments have confirmed what I always believed. The dust is an emanation from the dark principle itself. And, do I detect Zoroastrian heresy? What used to be heresy? And if we could isolate the dark principle, Svalbard, did you say? Armoured bears, the ablation board. The children don't suffer, I'm sure of it. Lord Asriel imprisoned. Lyra had heard enough. She turned away, and moving as quietly as the moth Pantalaimon, she went into her bedroom and closed the door. The noise of the party was muffled at once. "Well," she whispered, and he became a goldfinch on her shoulder. "Are we going to run away?" he whispered back. "Of course. If we do it now with all these people, she might not notice for a while." "He will." Pantalaimon meant Mrs. Coulter's demon. When Lyra thought of when Lyra thought of his lithe golden shape, she felt ill with fear. "I'll fight him this time," Pantalaimon said boldly. "I can change, and he can't. I'll change so quickly he won't be able to keep hold. This time I'll win. You'll see." Lyra nodded distractedly. What should she wear? How could she get out without being seen? "You'll have to go and spy," she whispered. "As soon as it's clear, we'll have to run. Be a moth," she added. "Remember, the second no one's looking." She opened the door a crack and he crawled out, dark against the warm pink light in the corridor. Meanwhile, she hastily flung on the warmest clothes she had and stuffed some more into one of the cold silk bags from the fashionable shop they had visited that very afternoon. Mrs. Coulter had given her money like sweets, and although she had spent it lavishly, there were still several sovereigns left, which she put in the pocket of the dark wolfskin coat. Last of all, she packed the alethiometer in its black velvet cloth. Had that abominable monkey found it? Well, he must have done. He must have told her. Oh, if only she'd hidden it better. She tiptoed to the door. Her room opened into the end of the corridor nearest the hall, luckily, and most of the guests were in the two big rooms further along. There was the sound of voices talking loudly, laughter, the quiet flushing of a lavatory, the tinkle of glasses, and then a tiny moth at her voice. And then a tiny moth voice at her ear said, "Now, quick." She slipped through the door and into the hall, and in less than 3 seconds she was opening the front door of the flat. A moment after that she was through and pulling it quietly shut. With Pantalaimon and Goldfinch again, she ran for the stairs and fled. Hairy McClary. Okay, number 6, the throwing nets. Whatever that means. She walked quickly away from the river, because the embankment was wide and well lit. There was a tangle of narrow streets between there and the Royal Arctic Institute, which was the only place Lyra was sure of being able to find, and into that dark maze she hurried now. If only she knew London as well as she knew Oxford. Then she would have known which streets to avoid, or where she could scrounge some food, or, best of all, which doors to knock on and find shelter. In that cold night, the dark alleys all around were alive with movement and secret life, and she knew none of it. Pantalaimon became a wildcat and scanned the dark all around with his night-piercing eyes. Every so often he'd stop, bristling, and she would turn aside from the entrance she'd been about to go down. The night was full of noises, bursts of drunken laughter, 2 raucous voices raised in song, the clatter and whine of some badly oiled machine in a basement. Lyra walked delicately through it all, her senses magnified and mingled with Pantalaimon, keeping to the shadows and the narrow alleys. From time to time, she had to cross a wider, well-lit street, where the tramcars hummed and sparked under their anbaric wires. There were rules for crossing London streets, but she took no notice, and when anyone shouted, she fled. It was a fine thing to be free again. She knew that Pantalaimon, padding on his wildcat paws beside her, felt the same joy as she did to be in the open air, even if it was murky London air, laden with fumes and soot and clangorous with noise. Sometime soon they'd have to think over the meaning of what they'd heard in Mrs. Coulter's flat, but not yet. And sometime, eventually, they'd have to find a place to sleep. At a crossroads near the corner of a big department store whose windows shone brilliantly over the wet pavement, there was a coffee stall, a little hut on wheels. A little hut on wheels with a counter under the wooden flap that swung up like an awning. Yellow light glowed inside, and the fragrance of coffee drifted out. The white-coated owner was leaning on the counter, talking to 2 or 3 of the customers. It was tempting. Lyra had been walking for an hour now, and it was cold and damp. With Pantalaimon as a sparrow, she went up to the counter and reached up to gain the owner's attention. "Cup of coffee and a ham sandwich, please," she said. "Well, you're out late, my dear," said the gentleman in a top hat and white silk muffler. "Yeah," she said, turning away from him to scan the busy intersection. A theatre nearby was just emptying, and crowds milled around the lighted foyer, calling for cabs, wrapping coats around their shoulders. In the other direction was the entrance of Chthonic railway station, with more crowds pouring up and down the steps. Here you are, love, said the coffee stall man. 2 shillings. Let me pay for this, said the man in the top hat. Lyra thought, well, why not? I can run faster than him, and I might need all the money later. The top-hatted man dropped a coin on the counter and smiled down at her. His demon was a lemur. He clung to his lapel, staring round-eyed at Lyra. She bit into a sandwich, and he kept her eyes on the busy street. She bit into a sandwich. And kept her eyes on the busy street. She had no idea where she was, because she had never seen a map of London, and she didn't even know how big it was, or how far she'd have to walk to find the country. What's your name? Said the man. Alice. That's a pretty name. Let me put a drop of this into your coffee. Warm you up. He was unscrewing the top of the silver flask. Oh, I don't like that, said Lyra. I just like coffee. I bet you've never had brandy like this before. Oh, I have. I was sick all over the place. I had a whole bottle, or nearly. Just as you like, said the man, tilting the flask into his own cup. Where are you going, all alone like this? Going to meet my father. And who's he? He's a murderer. He's a what? I told you. He's a murderer. It's his profession. He's doing a job tonight. I got his clean clothes in here, because, well, he's usually all covered in blood when he's finished a job. Ha, you're joking. I ain't. The lemur uttered a soft mewing sound and clambered slowly up the man's head to peer out at her. She drank her coffee stolidly and ate the last of her sandwich. Good night, she said. Oh, I can see my father coming now. Oh, he looks a bit angry. The top hat man glanced around, and Lyra set off towards the theatre crowd. Much as she would have liked to see the Chthonic railway, Mrs. Coulter had said it was not really intended for people of their class. She was wary of being trapped underground. Better to be out in the open, where she could run if she had to. On and on she walked, and the streets became darker and emptier. It was drizzling, but even if there had been no clouds, the city sky was too tainted with light to show stars. Pantalaimon thought they were going north, but who could tell? Endless streets of little identical brick houses, with gardens only big enough for a dustbin. Great gaunt factories behind wire fences, with one ambaric light glowing bleakly high up on a wall, and a night watchman snoozing by his brazier. Occasionally a dismal oratory, only distinguished from a warehouse by the crucifix outside. Once she tried the door of one of these places, only to hear a groan from a bench a foot away in the darkness. She realised that the porch was full of sleeping figures and fled. "Where are we going to sleep, Pan?" she said as they trudged down the street of closed and shuttered shops. "A doorway somewhere?" "Oh, I don't want to be seen, though. They're all so open. But there's a canal down there." He was looking down a side road to the left. Sure enough, a patch of dark glimmer showed open water, and when they cautiously went to look, they found a canal basin where a dozen or so barges were tied up at the wharves, some high in the water, some low and laden under the gallows like cranes. A dim light shone through one window of a wooden hut, and a thread of smoke rose from the metal chimney. Otherwise, the only lights were high up on the wall of the warehouse, or the gantry of a crane leaving the ground in gloom. The wharves were piled up with barrels of coal spirit, with stacks of great round logs, with rolls of covered cable. Lyra tiptoed up to the hut and peeped in at the window. An old man was laboriously reading a picture story paper and smoking a pipe with his spaniel demon curled up asleep on the table. As she looked, the man got up and brought a blackened kettle from the iron stove and poured some hot water into a cracked mug before settling back down with his paper. "Shall we ask him to let us in, Pan?" she whispered. But he was distracted. He was a bat, an owl, a wildcat again. She looked all around, catching his panic, and then she saw them at the same time as he did. 2 men running at her, one from each side, the nearer holding a throwing net. Pantalaimon uttered a harsh scream and launched himself as a leopard at the closer man's demon, a savage-looking fox, bowling her backwards so that she tangled with the man's legs. The man cursed and dodged aside, and Lyra darted past him towards the open spaces of the wharf. What she mustn't do was get boxed into a corner. Pantalaimon, an eagle now, swooped at her and carried. "Left, left!" She swerved that way and saw a gap between the coal spirit barrels and the end of the corrugated iron shed, and darted for it like a bullet. But those throwing nets! She heard a hiss in the air, and past her cheek something lashed and sharply stung, and loathsome tarred strings across her face. Her arms, her hands tangled and held her, and she fell, snarling and tearing and struggling in vain. "Pan! Pan!" But the fox demon tore at the cat Pantalaimon, and Lyra felt the pain in her own flesh, and sobbed a great cry as he fell. One man was swiftly lashing the cords around her limbs, her throat, body, head, bundling her over and over on the wet ground. She was helpless, exactly like a fly being trussed by a spider. Poor hurt Pan was dragging himself toward her, with the fox demon worrying his back, and he had no strength left to change. The other man was lying in a puddle with an arrow through his neck. The whole world grew still as the man tying the net saw it too. Pantalaimon sat up and blinked, and then there was a soft thud, and the net man fell choking and gasping right across Lyra, who cried out in horror. That was blood gushing out of him. Running feet, and someone hauled the man away and bent over him. Then other hands lifted Lyra, a knife snicked and pulled, and the net strings fell away one by one, and she tore them off, spitting, and hurled herself down to cuddle Pantalaimon. Kneeling, she twisted to look up at the newcomers, 3 dark men, one armed with a bow, the other with knives, and as she turned, the bowman caught his breath. "That ain't Lyra." A familiar voice, but she couldn't place it till he stepped forward and the nearest light fell on his face and the hawk demon on his shoulder. Then she had it. A Gyptian. A real Oxford Gyptian. "Tony Coster," he said. "Remember? You used to play with my little brother Billy off the boats in Jericho after the gobblers got him." "Oh, God, Pan, we're safe," she sobbed. But then a thought rushed into her mind. It was the Costa's boat she had hijacked that day. Suppose he remembered. "Well, better come along with us," he said. "You're alone." "Oh, no, you alone?" "Yeah, I was running away." "All right, don't talk now, just keep quiet. Jackson, move them bodies into the shadow. Karen, look around." Lyra stood up shakily, holding the wildcat Pantalaimon to her breast. He was twisting to look at something, and she followed his gaze, understanding and suddenly curious too. What had happened to the dead men's demons? They were fading. That was the answer, fading and drifting away like atoms of smoke. For all that they tried to cling to their men. Pantalaimon hid his eyes, and Lyra hurried blindly after Tony Costa. "What are you doing here?" she said. "Quiet, gal. There's enough trouble to wait without stirring more. We'll talk on the boat." He led her over a little wooden bridge into the heart of the canal basin. The other 2 men were padding silently after them. Tony turned along the waterfront and out onto the wooden jetty, from which he stepped on board a narrow boat and swung open the door to the cabin. "Get in," he said. "Quick now." Lyra did so, patting her bag, which she had never let go, even in the net, to make sure the alethiometer was still there. In the long, narrow cabin, by the light of the lantern on a hook, she saw a stout, powerful woman with grey hair sitting at a table with a paper. Lyra recognised her as Billy's mother. "Who's this?" the woman said. "Oh, that's never Lyra." "That's right, Ma. We got to move. We killed 2 men out in the basin. We thought they was gobblers, but I reckon they were Turk traders. They caught Lyra. But never mind talk. We'll do that on the move." "Come here, child," said Ma Costa. Lyra obeyed, half happy, half apprehensive, for Ma Costa had hands like bludgeons, and now she was sure it was their boat she had captured with Roger and the other collegers. But the boat mother set her hands on either side of Lyra's face, and a demon, the yellow-eyed hawk, crooned a quick welcome to Pantalaimon. Then Ma Costa folded her great arms about Lyra and pressed her to her breast. "I don't know what you're doing here, but you'll have worn out. You can have Billy's crib, soon as I got you a hot drink. Sit down there, child." It looked as if her piracy was forgiven, or at least forgotten. Lyra slid onto the cushioned bench behind a well-scrubbed pine tabletop as the low rumble of the gas engine shook the boat. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked. Ma Costa was setting a saucepan of milk on the iron stove and riddling the grate to stir the fire up. "Away from here. No talking now. We'll talk in the morning." and she said no more, handing Lyra a cup of milk when it was ready, swinging herself up on deck when the boat began to move, exchanging occasional whispers with the men. Lyra sipped the milk and lifted a corner of the blind to watch the dark wharves move past. A minute or two later, she was sound asleep. She awoke in a narrow bed, with that comforting engine rumble deep below. She sat up, banging her head, and cursed, felt around, and got up more carefully. A thin grey light showed her 3 other bunks, each empty and each neatly made, one below hers, and the other 2 across the tiny cabin. She swung over the side to find herself in her underclothes, and saw the dress and the wolfskin coat folded at the end of the bunk together, with her shopping bag. The alethiometer was still there. She dressed quickly and went through the door at the end to find herself in the cabin with the stove, where it was warm. There was no one there, though through the windows she saw a grey swirl of fog on each side, with occasional dark shapes that might have been buildings or trees. Before she could go out on deck, the outer door opened, and Ma Costa came down, swathed in an old tweed coat, on which the damp had settled like 1,000 tiny pearls. "Sleep well," she said, reaching for a frying pan. "Now sit down, out the way, and I'll make you some breakfast. Don't stand about, there ain't room." "Where are we?" said Lyra. "On a Grand Junction Canal. Now you keep out of sight, child. I don't want to see you topside. There's trouble." She sliced a couple of rashers of bacon into the frying pan and cracked an egg to go with them. "What sort of trouble?" "Nothing we can't cope with. Well, if you stay out of the way." And she wouldn't say any more till Lyra had eaten. The boat slowed at one point, and something banged against the side, and she heard men's voices raised in anger, but then someone's joke made them laugh, and the voices drew away, and the boat moved on. Presently, Tony Costa swung down into the cabin. Like his mother, he was pearled with damp, and he shook his woolen hat over the stove to make the drops jump and spit. "What are we going to tell him, Ma?" "Ask first, tell after." He poured some coffee into a tin cup and sat down. He was a powerful, dark-faced man, and now she could see him in the daylight. Lyra saw a sad grimness in his expression. "Right," he said. "Now you tell us what you was doing in London, Lyra. We had you down as being took by the gobblers." "I was living with this lady, right?" Lyra clumsily collected her story and shook it into order as if she was settling a pack of cards ready for dealing. She told them everything except about the alethiometer. "And then last night at this cocktail party, I found out what they were really doing. Mrs. Coulter was one of the gobblers herself, and she was going to use me to help her catch more kids. And what they do is..." Ma Costa left the cabin and went out to the cockpit. Tony waited till the door was shut and went on. "We know what they do. At least we know part of it. We know they don't come back. Them kids is taken up north, far out of the way, and they do experiments on them. First, well, we reckon they tried out different diseases and medicines, but there'd be no reason to start that all of a sudden 2 or 3 years back. Then we thought about the Tartars. Maybe there's some secret deal they're making up Siberia way, because the Tartars want to move north as much as the rest for the coal spirit and the fire mines, and there's been rumours of war for even longer than the gobblers have been going. And we reckon the gobblers were buying off the Tartar chiefs by giving them kids, because Tartars eat them, don't they? I mean, they bake children and eat them." "They never." "They do. There's plenty of other things to be told, and all... Well, you ever heard of the... Sorry, they do. There's plenty of other things to be told, and all. You ever heard of the Nalcains? Nalcains? Lyra said, "No, not even with Mrs. Coulter. What are they?" "That's kind of ghosts they have up there in those forests. Same size as a child, and they got no heads. They feel their way about at night, and if you're out sleeping in the forest, they get a hold of you and won't nothing make them let go. Nalcains, that's a northern word. And the windsuckers, they're dangerous too. They drift about in the air. They come across clumps of them floated together sometimes. You come across clumps of them floated together sometimes, or caught snagged on a bramble. As soon as they touch you, all the strength goes out of you. You can't see them, except as a kind of shimmer in the air. And the breathless ones? Well, who are they? Warriors, half killed. Being alive is one thing and being dead's another, but being half killed is, well, worse than either. They just can't die, and living is altogether beyond them. They wander about forever. They're called the breathless ones because what's been done to them." "And what's that?" said Lyra, wide-eyed. The northern Tartars snap open their ribs, pull out their lungs. There's an art to it. They do it without killing them, but their lungs can't work anymore without their demons pumping them by hand. So the result is they're halfway between breath and no breath, life and death, half killed, you see. And the demons, they got to pump and pump all day and night, or else they perish with them. You come across a whole platoon of breathless ones in the forest sometimes, I've heard. And then there's the Panzerborn. You ever heard of them? That means armoured bears. They're like a kind of polar bear, except, yes, I have heard of them. One of the men last night, he said that my uncle, Lord Asriel, he's been imprisoned in a fortress guarded by armoured bears. Is he now? What's he doing up there? Exploring. But the way the man was talking, I don't think my uncle's on the same side as the gobblers. I think they were glad he was in prison. Well, he won't get out if the armoured bears are guarding him. They're like mercenaries, you know. They're like mercenaries. You know what I mean by that? They sell their strength to whoever pays. They got hands like men, and they learn the trick of working iron way back. Meteoric iron mostly, and they make great sheets and plates out of it to cover themselves. They've been raiding the Skraelings for centuries. They're vicious killers, absolutely pitiless. But they keep their word. If you make a bargain with the Panzerborn, you can rely on it. Lyra considered these horrors with awe. Oh, Ma don't like to hear about the North, Tony said after a few moments, because of what might have happened to Billy. We know they took him up north, see. Well, how would you know that? Well, we caught one of the gobblers and made him talk. That's how we know a little about what they're doing. Them two last nights weren't gobblers. They were too clumsy. If they'd been gobblers, well, they took them alive. See, Egyptian people, we've been hit worse than most by gobblers, and we were coming together to decide what to do about it. That's what he was doing in the basin last night. That's what we was doing in the basin last night. Taking stores, because we're going on to a big muster up in the fens, what we call a roping. And what I reckon is we're going to send out a rescue party when we heard what the other Egyptians know, when we put our knowledge together. That's what I'd do if I was John Fa. Who's John Fa? Well, the king of the Egyptians. And you're really going to rescue the kids? Well, what about Roger? Who's Roger? The Jordan College kitchen boy. He was took the same as Billy the day before I came away with Mrs. Coulter. I bet if I was took, he'd come and rescue me. Well, if you're going to rescue Billy, I want to come and rescue Roger. And Uncle Asriel, she thought, but she didn't mention that. Chapter 7, John Farr. Now that Lyra had a task in mind, she felt much better. Helping Mrs. Coulter had been, all very well, but Pantalaimon was right. She wasn't really doing any work there. She was just a pretty pet. On the Egyptian boats, there was real work to do, and Ma Costa made sure she did it. She cleaned and swept. She peeled potatoes and made tea. She greased the propeller shaft bearings. She kept the wood trap clear over the propeller. She washed dishes. She opened lock gates. She tied the boat up to the mooring posts, and within a couple of days she was as much at home with this new life as she had been, as if she had been born Egyptian. What she didn't notice was that the Costas were alert every second for unusual signs of interest in Lyra from the waterside people. If she hadn't realised she was important, and Mrs. Coulter and the Oblation Board were bound to be I totally got that wrong. What she didn't notice was that the Costas were alert every second for unusual signs of interest in Lyra from the waterside people. If she hadn't realised it, she was important, and Mrs. Coulter and the Oblation Board were bound to be searching everywhere for her. Indeed, Tony heard gossip in pubs along the way that the police were making raids on houses and farms and building yards and factories without any explanation, though there was a rumour that they were searching for a missing girl. And that in itself was odd, considering all the kids that had gone missing without being looked for. Egyptians and landfolk alike were getting jumpy and nervous. And there was another reason for the Costas' interest in Lyra, but she wasn't to learn that for a few days yet. So they took to keeping her below deck when they passed a little keeper's cottage or a canal basin, or anywhere where there were likely to be idlers hanging about. Once they passed through a town where the police were searching all the boats that came along the waterway and holding up the traffic in both directions. The Costas were equal to that, though. There was a secret compartment beneath Ma's bunk where Lyra lay cramped for 2 hours, while the police banged up and down the length of the boat unsuccessfully. "Why didn't their demons find me, though?" she asked afterwards, and Ma showed her the lining of the secret space, cedarwood, which had a soporific effect on demons, and it was true that Pantalaimon had spent the whole time happily asleep by Lyra's head. Slowly, with many halts and detours, the Costa's boat drew nearer the fens, that wide and never fully mapped wilderness of huge skies and endless marshland in eastern Anglia. The furthest fringe of it mingled oh no, that's a hurdle. The furthest fringe of it mingled indistinguishably. Killed that. With the creeks and tidal inlets of the shallow sea, and the other side of the sea mingled indistinguishably with Holland, and parts of the fens had been drained and diked by Hollanders, some of whom had settled there, so the language of the fens was thick with Dutch. But parts had never been drained or planted or settled at all, and in the wildest central regions where eels slithered and waterbirds flocked, where eerie marsh fires flickered, way lurkers tempted careless travellers to their doom in the swamps. That's timely, because my mouth is, I'm getting words. Oh, higgledy-piggledy. Let's just finish that. Actually, no, what I'll do is I'll start with that next time. So there we have a couple of chapters, Northern Lights. Oh, it's good. It's really good. It's really good to be reading that again. You can just feel so glad that she got away from Mrs. Coulter, back with the Egyptians, and the pace is really picking up now. People are looking for her. The Egyptians are keeping her, under wraps, and so we'll have to see what happens with the roping. Was it the roping? What John Farr decides to do. So we're back reading Northern Lights again. It is a speedy read, so there will be interruptions. I will get words wrong. Things will not be perfect because it's not rehearsed. I'm just reading it, and so I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll see you next time for another speedy read. All right, cheerio, bye-bye.
Above there are no stars tonight, just northern sky, reflected light upon your face. People think stars rule our lives, some people, they think otherwise, they can be replaced.